Hello, good afternoon. My name is Tamika Brown, and I'm the director of ECMC's The College Place located in Richmond, Virginia. Today, I'm excited to share some really helpful information about paying for college. So in this talk today, I am going to talk about college costs, like how much does it cost on average to attend a post-secondary institution in this country, and specifically here in the state of Virginia. I'm going to talk about financial aid programs that are offered by the federal government as well as the state, even different colleges and universities. Then I'll talk about the different applications that students must complete to have access to these financial aid programs. And then I'll wrap up with ways that families can start talking about paying for college, because it's a huge conversation and it makes everyone uncomfortable because no one likes to talk about money, but it's a necessary conversation to have in the planning process for preparing for college success. So let's jump in. So as I mentioned, before we actually talk about what the financial aid programs are, I think it's important first to know how much it costs to attend college. So it's important that on average, it costs a student about $12,000 to attend a community college here in the state of Virginia. It costs about $25,700 to attend a public college in Virginia, and then it costs about $35,000 to attend a private college or university here in the state of Virginia. Now, usually when we're looking at these numbers and we're sitting down with families, parents kind of zoom in on the total number specifically for private schools, and they're like, wait, is that per year? Is that for the whole program? Like how much, like what goes into this $35,000? And so it's important to unpack what the cost of attendance is. Every college or university comes up with a number that they believe is the amount that the average student will need in order to successfully enroll and matriculate at that school. But those expenses that are included under COA can be divided into two categories, or are divided into two categories. Direct fees, which are fees you pay directly to the school, and then indirect costs are those fees that the school knows will be a part of your attendance, like things that you're going to have to pay for as a function of going to school there, but you don't pay them directly to school. So what are the direct costs? Direct costs are tuition, the money you pay to go to the school and to be in the building, to be on the campus, the required fees that all schools generally require, and then food and housing. If a student lives on campus, food and housing will include their dorm fees as well as their meal plan. If a student lives off campus, though, their food and housing expenses could include their rent, or how much and including how much they, the things that they eat on a regular basis. But those are direct costs that are associated with college attendance. And if a student is living on campus, they pay these three things directly to the school. The other side of this circle, though, is the indirect costs. Other things that are included in the cost of attendance that you have some agency and control over. The school may report that students will need $1,000 a semester or $1,000 a year for books and supplies, but it really depends on where you choose to get your books and supplies. How much you'd actually spend on those particular areas. But again, the school still reports one amount. Same thing with personal expenses and transportation fees. It depends on how far a student lives from their campus of choice. It depends on what their personal expenses will be, or the things that are important to them personally, to determine how much they'd even spend in those particular areas. So we want to make sure that parents and students understand that the cost of attendance, yes, is a big number, but it can be broken down to subcategories. One subcategory you're going to pay directly to the school, and those are direct fees. And then the indirect ones, you have some control over that. I encourage folks, break out with a calculator and recalculate those indirect costs, and come up with a number that will more accurately reflect what your expenses will be. How much would it cost you to attend UCLA and you live in Richmond? What will your transportation expenses be? What would your personal expenses be? You may not be able to predict book costs, but you can reach out to students who share that major and have some idea of, so on average, every semester, how much do you think you spend on books? But all this information is going to be helpful in empowering parents with information to make informed decisions about paying for college. One great tool that the U.S. Department of Education has required is the net price calculator. Every college or university in this country keeps a net price calculator, which allows students to input their family income and asset information along with their academic information, so their GPA. And what the calculator does is that it tells the student how much they may have to pay the school to attend there after all gift aid, which is free financial aid, so scholarships and grants, have been awarded. So it tells them how much essentially their bill may be to go to school there. Every college in this country is required to keep one. You can even Google the school's name in that price calculator, and a lot of them come up that way easily, but every college has one. And you can even go to collegecost.ed.gov to access the database for all of them. So you can just put in a school's name and then use the net price calculator to have some idea. But I think everyone should use this tool. It really gives you insight into how much you can expect to spend, or you can expect your gap to be for different schools that you're considering. So now we've talked about the cost of attendance to go to college. Now let's talk about the different financial aid programs. In this country, financial aid is generally separated into two categories: gift aid and self-help. Gift aid, essentially, when we receive a gift, we pay nothing for it. So gift aid comes in the form of grants and scholarships. It's what we call free money. Gift aid can be either need-based, which is based on a family's ability to pay for college, or merit-based, which is based on the student's grades or athletic ability. Next, you have earned help, which is a student's opportunity to work and make money to help offset their college costs. That could be in the form of the federal or institutional work study program, or some military benefits. If a student chooses to do ROTC or the National Guard, they have some educational benefits that come with that enrollment. But work study, though, is a need-based financial aid program. The other form of self-help aid is borrowed aid. That's money that students borrow with the expectation that they will repay with interest. They can get loans from the federal government, and they also can apply for student loans through private servicers as well. But it's just important to know it's a different process for borrowing loans than it is for using some of the other form of financial aid. And students need to understand that when they borrow, it's with the expectation that they will repay. But we'll talk more about loans later. So what are the gift aid programs that exist? A lot of times when we talk about gift aid or we talk about financial aid, we never really name the programs. We just kind of say financial aid or grants or scholarships, but I think it's important to unpack. So what are the gift aid programs that exist to help students pay for college? So in this country, the federal government awards a total of 4 grants to students who are pursuing post-secondary education. The first is the federal Pell Grant. This is a grant that awards a student up to $7,300 to offset their college costs. This program is for students from high-need communities, so students have to prove financial need in order to qualify for the Pell Grant. Next, the Federal Supplemental Education Opportunities Grant, or FSEOG, is a program that it can award up to about $2,000 in aid to students. The Pell Grant is based on need, and if you qualify and complete the FAFSA by your school's deadline, you'll be awarded the Pell Grant. But FSEOG is first come, first serve. So I really tell students, if you know that paying for college is a concern of yours, please make sure you get this application done as soon as possible so that you may have access to FSEOG and other first come, first serve buckets of money. Next, the TEACH grant, the Teachers Education Assistance in College and Higher Ed program, essentially allows the federal government allows colleges to determine whether or not they'd be willing to award $4,000 grants every year to students who commit to teaching 2 years within the 8 years after they graduate in a high-need community or a high-need content area. Students who agree to that 2-year service requirement will get the $4,000 grant every year that they're in college. But at any point after the grant has been awarded to the student, if they decide that they don't want to fulfill that teaching requirement, if it's after they've gotten a grant one time for that first year, or 8 years after they've graduated, they have not met the teaching requirement, that grant becomes a loan with interest, backdated to the moment of disbursement. So I tell students, the Teach Grant is a great program to take advantage of, as long as you understand what the consequences are if you choose not to fulfill the service requirement. But it's 2 years of teaching, fulfill the service requirement. The last federal grant here is the Iraq and Afghanistan Service Grant. This grant awards the equivalent of the Pell Grant to students who are survivors of U.S. servicemen who died in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, or who died in the attack of 9/11. Those students will receive the equivalent of that year's Pell Grant. A question that often comes up is like, how do I know if I'm eligible for a Pell Grant? How do I know, what is the maximum salary or the minimum salary that I can have to qualify for the Pell Grant? So we worked out a couple graphs, tables to kind of give a layout of how students become eligible, the income that's eligible for Pell Grant based on family size. So in a single parent family, for example, if the family size is 2, meaning the student and one parent, then the maximum income that the family can have to qualify for the Pell Grant is $41,198. So with $41,198, the family qualifies for the Pell Grant up till $59,408. If the family makes $1 more than that, then the student does not qualify for any Pell Grant. So essentially, that was just the example. You can use this chart as you see fit, but it's really helpful in getting some insight into, what is the family income limit based on family size for Pell Grant eligibility. Also, another example using the two-parent family size. The family size is 3. That's 2 parents and 1 child. The maximum Pell eligibility is $48,563. If they get paid $1 more than $76,313, though, they will not be eligible for the Pell Grant. So just to be aware, again, you can use this table as you see fit, but we just want to be clear about some of the numbers. So we talked about what are the federal programs that are available through the federal government, the gift aid programs that are available through the federal government. Here are the gift aid programs that are available from the state of Virginia to help offset costs for students who live in Virginia. Here we have 5 grant programs. The first 4 are for students who are pursuing education at public colleges or universities here in the state of Virginia. The first, the Virginia Commonwealth Award, is based on a student's need, but essentially it can award a student around $4,000 to offset their college costs to attend any public school in the state. This says up to tuition and fees, but generally, Virginia Commonwealth Award is around $4,000. VGAP, or Virginia Guaranteed Assistance Program, is based on students' financial need and merit, which is their grades. So they have to have a GPA of 2.5 in high school to qualify for VGAP, and then a 2.0 every year after that to renew this particular grant. But it's eligible, it's for students who are pursuing any public college in the state of Virginia. Students can be awarded anywhere from $3,000 to $14,000, $3,000 to $14,000 to contribute to their college costs. But it's important that students keep that GPA requirement to be eligible for this program year after year. And it's not uncommon for students to be awarded the Commonwealth Award and VGAP at the same time. The next program, the Virginia Military Survivors Independent Education Program, provides a full tuition waiver plus living stipend for students who are survivors of U.S. servicemen who were deployed and died while they were in deployment, or they're dependents of veterans who have Virginia residency, but are at least 90% disabled as a result of military service. Those students receive a full waiver to attend any college or any public college or university in the state of Virginia, as well as living expenses. But that program is limited to students who are 27 years of age and younger. Next, the Workforce Credential Grant is the only grant on this list that does not require a student to complete the FAFSA. This particular grant program funds a lot of the short-term training credentials that are available through the Virginia Community College system across the state. Many students have been able to enter this program, get a credential in 6 to 12 weeks, free of charge, because it's based on family income, the amount of grants that's available to you, but free of charge, and they're able to get directly into the world of work. Now, this is not a program for everyone, but it is a great fit for the right student, a student who may be trying to figure out what's next for them and haven't really narrowed down their college choice or what they want to do professionally, or a student who wants a credential under their belt to be able to make a family-sustaining wage. That could be an awesome program for them. So I encourage them to reach out to their local Virginia Community College System school and get connected for the Workforce Credential Grant through Fast Forward VA. The last grant here is the Virginia Tuition Assistance Grant Program, or VTAG. This is the only grant for students who are pursuing education at Virginia's private colleges and universities. With this program, students can receive up to $4,000 to offset their college costs. And any of these, any of these grants that you see here are available to both U.S. citizens who have Virginia residency and non-U.S. citizens who are in the state of Virginia for a number of 2 years. I'll talk more about the qualifications for tuition equity and the VASA application in a minute. Other forms of gift aid, institutional funding. Colleges and universities have the ability, and they do award institutional funding to students who apply and are accepted to their school, and also who completes the FAFSA. That money is provided by the school, but it's important for folks to know that the schools create that awarding criteria. So yes, they give money. Yes, they give a lot of it, but they determine how that money will be awarded. Other forms of gift aid include scholarships. Now, I won't spend a lot of time focusing on scholarships, but I will say I have them listed in this order for a reason. Oftentimes, students want to gravitate to the huge national scholarships because they tend to award a lot of money. Gates, Ron Brown, Jackie Robinson, Coca-Cola, phenomenal scholarship programs. Many of them cover all of a student's undergraduate expenses through the duration of their bachelor's degree, and some even extend into any terminal degree or additional education beyond a bachelor's degree that a student may pursue. But students have to take a step back and consider how competitive they are in those particular applicant pools. Does it make sense for you to complete 6 essays for an application if you barely meet the qualifications for applying? In situations like that, I encourage students to pursue applicant pools or scholarship programs where you are the most competitive. Those are found at your high schools. There are folks reaching out to your guidance staff, your college and career planning staff at your high schools and saying, we want to award a scholarship to graduating seniors at this school. In that situation, students are only competing against other members of their senior class who actually complete the application. So in that case, it's a bit more competitive for them, and their chances of actually being awarded the scholarship is much greater. I'm often asked, what are some scholarship databases or search engines that you would recommend for students to use to find scholarships? Here are a list of some of the more reputable ones. There are many others that are reputable that aren't listed here, but I just want to make a point. Regardless of what platform or database you're using, use some wisdom and caution as you move through these spaces. In any of these platforms, someone can create a scholarship entry with malintent, with the intent of getting students identifying information and using it for illegal reasons. So just use some wisdom as you move through these particular search engines. If a program is asking you to give them money to give you money, it's probably a scam. If they're asking you for your banking information, it's probably a scam. If they're asking you for your social security number before they actually award you, they've decided they're going to award you the scholarship, it's probably a scam. So I encourage you to reach out to myself or any other adults or professionals if you encounter programs that you're like, I don't know how I feel about this. Now let's switch gears to talk about earned aid. We've been talking about gift aid, all the free money that's available before now. Now let's shift gears to focus a bit on earned aid. As I mentioned earlier, the Federal Work-Study Program is an opportunity for students to work on or near their college campus and make money. On the FAFSA, essentially, they will take into account the family income and determine whether or not a student should be considered for work study. And then if they are, their school, the school on their financial aid statement will offer work study to the actual student. This is different from in years past. Last year, because of the FAFSA changes, that's how the Federal Work Study Program will be now. Last year, students actually had to check yes on their FAFSA to be considered. Now that's no longer a question. All students are considered for work study, and it's based on the family's income. But many students who do work study have phenomenal things to report. They love the opportunity to work closely with professors and other professionals to get some insight into the world of work and develop a skill set that they can use after they graduate from college. All right, so we talked about earned aid. Now let's focus on borrowed aid. Borrowed aid essentially is loans, money that students borrow with the expectation that they will repay it. A lot of students say that they're going to pay for college with student loans. And I think it's important to unpack what are the loan programs that exist and how can students access them. The Federal Direct Loan Program is the only loan program for undergraduate dependent students to borrow from the federal government to offset their college costs. An undergraduate student can borrow up to a total of $5,500 their first year in college to contribute to their college costs using the Federal Direct Loan Program. The first loan, the direct subsidized loan, is a need-based loan where the federal government pays the 5.5% interest while the student is actively enrolled in school. This program will allow a student to borrow up to $3,500 to offset their college costs. The next program, the direct unsubsidized program, is like the subsidized loan program, but the difference is the student is responsible for the interest. The interest is not subsidized by the federal government, so the student is responsible for the interest from the moment of disbursement. So students don't have to pay interest as it accumulates, but it will start accumulating after the loan is dispersed to the student. The last loan here you see is a Direct Plus loan, and there's two programs under Direct Plus. The Graduate Plus loan, which is just for students pursuing graduate studies, so master's degrees, PhDs, and then the Parent Plus loan program, which allows a parent, a biological or adoptive parent, to borrow up to the total cost of attendance for their kid to attend any school in this country at an 8.05% interest rate. But it's important to know that families have to complete an additional application to have access to the Parent Plus loan, and approval is based on the family not having a negative credit history. What are some other ways that families can pay for college? What are some other ways that, additional ways that they can consider approaching the process of paying for college? Well, students can commit to military service through the Reserve Officers Training Corps, the ROTC, the Peace Corps, the National Guard, the military reserves, to essentially in exchange for their service, they can get an education award and a living stipend to use towards college costs. But it's important for students to know that these programs require service. It requires service. So please, please, please be sure that they're willing to fulfill the service requirement of military service if they choose to take advantage of these education benefits. Also, families can use savings if they have savings, and if one of the parents is a veteran and did not exhaust their GI benefits, they may be able to transfer the balance or use what's left of their GI benefits for a dependent, whether it be a parent, whether it be a spouse or a child. So how do we access all of the financial aid I just mentioned, the gift aid, the borrowed aid, the earned aid? How do we access all of these financial aid programs? Well, students have to complete applications. There are a number of applications that a student may have to complete, but I'm going to go over all of them, starting with the free application for federal student aid, or the FAFSA. It's the gatekeeper for all financial aid in this country. Next, the Virginia Alternative State Aid application, or the VASA application. It is an application for non-U.S. citizens who live in the state of Virginia to have access to state aid that's awarded by Virginia. The CSS Profile is a platform created by the College Board to capture additional financial information about the families. A prescribed list of schools actually uses the CSS Profile. Not everyone, but we'll talk about that shortly. And then lastly, students must complete scholarship applications to have access to scholarship aid. Every year I get calls from students towards the end of senior year who are a little bit frustrated and disappointed because they expected to be awarded tons of scholarship aid. These students say, I have a 5.0 GPA, I have a perfect SAT score, and I was expected to have more scholarship aid. And so the question I tend to ask is, what scholarships did you apply for? Well, in many cases, the student expressed or admitted that they didn't apply to many scholarship programs because they assumed that their grades or their SAT scores would just open the door, that somehow by osmosis, people would know about or scholarship programs would know about their GPA and their SAT score, their commitment to service, their commitment to volunteerism, and choose to give them scholarships. Well, that's not how it works. If you want to be considered for scholarships, you have to complete the application. So the first financial aid application I'll talk about is the free application for federal student aid, or the FAFSA. As I mentioned, it's the gatekeeper for all financial aid in this country. A school will not award a student any aid without a completed FAFSA on file. This application is the application that all U.S. citizens will complete to be considered for federal financial aid. And then there are other subset of students who qualify. They're known as eligible non-citizens who qualify for federal aid as well. To complete the FAFSA, they'll go on the FAFSA website, and I'll talk a minute about the FSA IDs and how they will need to create one to have access to complete the application online. But this year, the FAFSA is changing. It is only available online. So everyone should be aware of a couple of things. One, the FAFSA will be available starting in December this year, not October. Next year is going back to October, but this year it is available on December. Well, in December, we're not sure if it's actually December 1st or not, but in December. Next year is going to go back to October 1st, though. Also, as I mentioned, there are a group of non-citizens who are eligible for federal financial aid, meaning they're eligible to complete the FAFSA and be considered for the grants that I list, the work study opportunities, as well as the direct subsidized and unsubsidized loan program. Excuse me. But here's a graphic from Federal Student Aid directly that outlines who is eligible for federal financial aid. We already know that U.S. citizens and U.S. nationals are eligible, but what are the other groups? Folks who have a green card, folks who have an arrival and departure record, folks who have battered immigrant status, and lastly, those that have a T visa, or you're a child of a parent that has a T1 visa. Those students qualify for federal financial aid. To complete the FAFSA, students, and if they are a dependent or have a spouse, their contributors must create an FSA ID online to be able to complete the FAFSA online. This ID will not only be used for the FAFSA, but any student loans that, any federal student loan that the student may have, they'll use the same FSA ID to log into studentloans.gov to manage their loans there. To create an FSA ID, the student and contributors need their full legal name that's listed by the Social Security Administration, their date of birth, and their Social Security number. They also need a unique email address and phone number. They have to be unique. The student and the parent cannot share a phone number or email address. They have to be unique to create each of their respective FSA IDs. Parents, if you have created one for maybe an older sibling or yourself, as you pursued, maybe you want to be considered for federal aid, you can't create a second one because they're tied to your date of birth and your Social Security number. So in that case, you can go on the website and click retrieve my FSA ID or forgot my username and password, and you'll go through a series of prompts to get that information returned to you. But students, please be sure to use an email address that's not connected to a school or a job. When you create your FSA ID, you're going to use this for years to come. And if you're no longer at that school and you forget your password, the only way you can get it back is by them sending a retrieval code to the email address you use when you set up the account. If you no longer have access to that account, you then have to go through this long, drawn out, very intrusive process through federal student aid to verify who you are so that they can give you the ability to reset your password. So you can avoid all of that by setting up your FSA ID with a password, with the email address that you'll have access to later on, like Gmail, iCloud, Yahoo, Hotmail. If you lose the password, they'll send information to that particular email address to allow you to reset it. Another thing that's different this year is the use of the term contributor to describe financial aid parents. We're moving away from the term financial aid parent because it's not inclusive of a spouse if a student is married. If they are independent and they are married, they would need someone else to provide information on their FAFSA as well, but they're not a parent. So now anyone who has to provide additional information on the FAFSA is known as a contributor. So that could be a parent, a step parent, or even a spouse. Oh, sorry. And to create the FSA ID, you can go to studentaid.gov and click create an account or start an account. It's listed as an account throughout the website, but if you see account, it means FSA ID. So how do you create one? Well, students will go on the actual website, hit create an FSA ID. They'll enter into a series of prompts that are going to a series of prompts is going to ask them for their name, birthday, Social Security number, email address, phone number. And then they're going to go through a series of verification where federal student aid is going to verify who they are. Now, if you are a U.S. citizen, this process is a little bit quicker. It's just going to be a cross-reference to Social Security Administration. And in a lot of cases, in a matter of minutes, your identity will be verified, and then you can move forward with completing your FAFSA. But if a student is not a U.S. citizen, then that process is going to take a little bit of time. Students as well as contributors, it's going to take a little bit of time. So it could take 1 to 3 days to get that information back to verify individuals' ID in order for them to use their FSA ID. But just have a little bit of patience because this year is going to be different. But once you create an FSA ID and you've completed the verification process, then students will be able to complete their portion of the FAFSA. One of the big changes that's happening this year is the direct transfer of income information from the IRS. Now, you may be thinking, well, Tamika, in years past, I've been able to transfer my information from the IRS. Well, in years past, you may have elected to transfer your information by using the IRS data retrieval tool. But this year, it is now required for everyone to provide consent for federal student aid to pull their income information directly from the IRS. This is not an option anymore. It is required for everyone to provide consent. Even a student who may not have a job has to provide consent, and every contributor must provide consent in order for the student to be considered for federal financial aid. It is a requirement for federal aid for them to provide consent. So I just want to be sure that that is very clear, that it is not an option. There are going to be a couple times throughout the platform. We've seen the mock-up where they're going to give you the option to say that you don't want to provide consent, and you can click no all the way up to the end. You can even manually submit family parents' financial information on the FAFSA. But if they did not provide consent, the student's FAFSA will not be successfully processed and they will not be considered for federal aid. So click yes to make sure that you've done what you need to do to be considered for aid. Another thing that's changing this year is who are the other people who may need to provide their financial information for the FAFSA. In years past, we've called these people financial parents, but now, as I mentioned earlier, we call them contributors. And it's a different process now to consider who has to provide information on a student's FAFSA. Years past has been based on kind of who the kid lives with. And in a lot of situations, it's going to stay the same. But I want to go through this kind of breakdown so it's very clear. If a student lives with both of their parents, whether the parents are married or they just live together, both parents are considered to be contributors and both have to provide their information for the FAFSA. The student will have an opportunity to input their contributor's name, email address, social security number, and birthday, I believe. And then after the student completes their portion of the application, federal student aid will send an email to the parent to let them know that, or the contributor to let them know that they can now complete their part of the application. In a situation where there are two parents, both parents are going to get the email saying that they can now provide their information. But whichever parent gets to the application first, submits the information, can formally submit the FAFSA. Both parents in a two-parents household situation do not have to provide their financial information. Let me get this right. Both parents in a two-parent household do not need to log in to the FAFSA website in order to submit the FAFSA. One parent can input the information for both parents using their one FSA ID, and then they're able to submit the application. So both parents will get the email, but essentially the first one who gets to the platform who provides the information is the one who can submit it officially. But both parents don't need to, or are not even able to submit financial information respectively for their students' FAFSA. In a situation where it's a two-parent household. If it's a situation where it's not a two-parent household, the contributor is the parent who provide more of the student's financial support over the past 12 months. So the parent who provided more of the student's financial support in the past 12 months is the financial parent. That parent, is the contributor. See, we're still trying to get used to the language. Is the contributor. That contributor must have an FSA ID. And when they get that email invitation from FSA after the student completes their part of the FAFSA, then the parent will log in with their FSA ID, complete their portion, and then sign and submit the FAFSA. Well, there are situations where families are kind of like, well, what if both parents say that they provide 50% of the student's financial support? Federal student aid says that the financial parent, the contributor will be the parent that has the most assets, will be the parent that provides the most assets. That has the most assets, not provides. The parent that has the most assets is considered to be the financial parent. Also, in either one of these cases where there's a single parent household, if there is a step parent involved, that step parent is also a contributor and must provide their information. So if a student is living with one parent and that parent is not the parent who provides more than half of their financial support. If it's the parent who does not live with them, that parent is a contributor. And if that parent is married, regardless of whether or not they share residence with the student, if that parent is married, the step parent is also a contributor. So one of them have to log into the FAFSA website to provide the financial information for both parents and then sign and submit the application. This is different. It's not based on who the child lives with. It depends on who provides their financial support. But in this process of figuring out who the contributor is, it's important to also know who's not a contributor. If a parent is not, if a student is living with someone who is not their natural or adoptive parent, they are not considered to be contributors if it's not a step parent. If a student lives with a brother or sister, grandparents, aunt, uncles, foster parents, they're in a legal guardianship, even situations where it's a widowed step parent, they're not considered to be contributors. Federal student aid will tell the student to go to a parent, whether the parent is in this country, whether the parent is incarcerated, they still have to report that parent's information directly. If you have a situation where you're like, I'm not super clear who my contributor may be based on this, please, I encourage you to reach out. My contact information will be posted at the end. So what are the sections of the FAFSA for the student? What information are they going to gather? So they're going to gather information about the student's demographics. So where do you live? Where do you go to school? They also are going to ask a series of questions to determine whether or not a student qualifies for either a special circumstance or an unusual circumstance that will require special consideration for their awarding them federal and state financial aid. So they're going to ask a series of questions on the FAFSA to do that. Also going to collect information about the student's financials. They can list up to 20 colleges or universities on the FAFSA that they would like to receive their financial information to be considered for financial aid. And then students will be able to provide consent and then their signature to complete their portion of the FAFSA. Once the parent receives an email, because the student has listed their information as a contributor, they listed their name, email address, birthday, social security number, then the parent will receive an email inviting them to complete their section of the FAFSA. When they get that email, then the parents will log in, finish their demographic section, provide consent to transfer their financial information from the IRS. They would also enter any other income information that's requested, maybe information about assets or information that's not gathered from the IRS. Parents will manually submit that. And then they'll have the opportunity to provide consent and then sign and submit their application as well. So moving away from the FAFSA, the other application in the state of Virginia that students may have to complete to qualify for aid. Now, this application is only for non-citizens. If you are a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen, and we saw the list of those who are eligible, you should only complete the FAFSA. Of these two, the FAFSA and the VASA, you should only complete the FAFSA. If you are a non-U.S. citizen, though, in the state of Virginia, you should complete the VASA. Now, it's two programs you should know about as a non-citizen. One is Virginia Tuition Equity. This program allows students who are non-U.S. citizens to attend any public college or university in the state of Virginia and pay in-state tuition costs. That's a game changer because there's a considerable difference between out-of-state and in-state tuition costs at public schools. But students who are not U.S. citizens who meet the criteria at the bottom that I'll discuss in a moment, they qualify for in-state tuition at any of the public schools. Also, starting last year, January of last year, we started the VASA application. The state started this application, the Virginia Alternative State Aid app, and it gives non-U.S. citizens who meet the criteria at the bottom access to those 5 state grants that are awarded in the state of Virginia. The VASA becomes available every year in October, but because of the delay with the FAFSA this year, it's going to become available in December, and students can complete that application at vasapp.org. But to qualify for both tuition equity and VASA, a non-U.S. citizen must have graduated from a Virginia high school on or after July 1st, 2008. They have to have attended a high school for at least 2 years, a Virginia high school for at least 2 years. And then themselves, as well as their contributor, if they are dependent, must have 2 years of Virginia tax returns to be able to qualify for both of those programs. It's often confusing for some folks to figure out which application should I do, especially because FAFSA and VASA sound very similar when you hear them spoken. So I created this kind of flow chart, this graph to kind of help students to understand which application makes sense for them. So if it's helpful, take a screen grab, but it's really useful in helping you figure out yes or no, which category do you fall into, and then giving you next steps for how to complete it. When you complete the FAFSA or the VASA, there's a series of information that you should have available to help you get through the application successfully. Now, this is a comprehensive list of all the things that you may need to complete the FAFSA, but if you encounter something on this list that's not relevant for you, then skip it. That means you don't need it. Ignore it even. But anything on this list, if anything is relevant to you, please have that documentation available with you because that information needs to be submitted on the FAFSA. So the FSA ID for both the student and the contributor, the 2022 1040 tax and W-2 forms, also statements of any checking, savings, and college savings accounts, including 529s. When this information is reported on the FAFSA, they say as of today, meaning the day that you're submitting the FAFSA, what is the total amount of cash savings and checking accounts that you have, and students have to report that number. Also, statements of any untaxed income if the family receives SSDI or unemployment compensation in some way, they should have those statements available to report how much money they receive from those programs annually. The market value of any stock and cryptocurrency on the day that you're submitting the FAFSA, the value of any real property, so any buildings or homes that the family may own, but not the home they currently reside in. The value of any businesses and any family farms must be reported. And if applicable, the parent's date of marriage, divorce, or separation must be reported. Common FAFSA errors, so things that we may encounter. You may encounter that is an error for the FAFSA, reasons why FAFSAs have been rejected or folks have it's slowed down the processing of their application. Here's some common ones. One, not using your legal name per the Social Security Administration records. We know that some people go by nicknames or middle names, but when you create your FSA ID and complete your FAFSA, this name should reflect what the Social Security Administration has listed for you. So please make sure you're listing the correct information for yourself as well as the contributor. Another error is incorrect tax filing status for contributors. This, in years past, folks who have not had the correct filing status have been able to kind of move past that. Last year, though, federal student aid started flagging those applications to let us know that it's illegal for two people who live in the same household and both file head of household. And so in those cases, parents have to file an amended tax return before they can formally submit the FAFSA. Please make sure that you have the correct filing status. We hate having those conversations because we know that it's a huge lift for families to then go back to a tax preparer and get their taxes amended. But it's a necessary step to qualify for federal aid and completing a FAFSA. So please make sure that information is correct. Also, choosing to refuse to provide consent will not get your application processed at all either by the student or either one of the contributors. So please make sure that you provide that information. Next, manually submitting financial information. As I mentioned earlier, there are going to be opportunities for students to manually submit information that can be transferred from the IRS. And if they choose to manually submit, but don't provide consent, their information still will not be processed. So consent is required. Also, not counting all dependents in the family size is going to be a thing that we anticipate a lot because they're changing how they define this group. In years past, this has been named the household size because the contributor was based on who the student shared residence with. Now, due to FAFSA changes, this category is family size because the family could be the family that the student does not currently reside with. So make sure you count all the dependents in the actual family size. Next, incomplete contributor section. Because the student can't complete the parents or the contributors section of the application, there's going to be a waiting game waiting for parents to complete their section and then to be able to formally submit the application is what we call sign and submit. So please, please, please make sure parents that you go back, complete your section of the FAFSA so that the student can formally submit the application and have it processed by federal student aid. All right, another application that students may have to complete to have access to federal aid is the CSS profile. This was a platform created by the College Board to capture additional financial information about the family. What I will say, everyone must complete the FAFSA in the world of Tamika Brown. Everyone must complete the free application for federal student aid, but not every student needs to complete the CSS profile. It really depends on the schools that you're applying to if you should complete the CSS profile. But if a school does require it, you have to list the school on the FAFSA and submit a profile to that school. I'll show in a minute a list of Virginia schools that are CSS profile schools. So those schools you have to list on the FAFSA and submit a profile. But many private colleges require the CSS profile, and some scholarship programs do. I'll say the programs that require it just give a lot of money, and they want to make sure that they're giving it to the right folks, which is why they're capturing additional information. To submit the profile, students pay $25 for one school, and then $16 for each school after that. But if a student qualifies for fee waivers through the College Board for the SATs, then they will qualify for fee waivers for the CSS profile and don't have to pay for those submission fees. They also ask for additional information, as I mentioned earlier. They ask for information about the non-custodial parent, regardless of whether or not they provide more than half a student's financial support. They also ask for additional income and asset information about the families. But it's a heavy lift, but it's worth it. It absolutely is worth it because the schools that require it give a lot of money. If a student is high need and they get accepted to a CSS profile school, chances are they're going to get enough financial aid to cover their cost of attendance. But they have to be sure that they complete these applications. So the Virginia schools that require it are listed here: William and Mary, Patrick Henry, University of Richmond, Christendom, University of Virginia, UVA's Law School, VCU's Medical School, and lastly, Washington and Lee require the CSS profile. If the school in Virginia is not listed on this, is not listed here, they don't require the CSS profile. So if you're only applying to Virginia schools and the school that you're interested in aren't listed here, then ignore the information about the CSS profile. It's only relevant if you are interested in a school that requires the CSS profile. Additional financial information that you might find helpful in preparing for paying for college or completing the FAFSA. After a student submits the FAFSA, they will receive a FAFSA submission summary immediately after they submit it, but they would have to wait a couple days to get their SAI. This used to be called the EFC in the past, the Estimated Family Contribution. Now it's the SAI, the Student Aid Index. And this index informs how much Pell Grant a student may have, may be eligible for. The SAIs range from negative 1,500 up to the maximum that a student may qualify for. But that information determines what federal aid a student is eligible for. And it could take up to 3 to 4 business days after a student submits a FAFSA to receive that information. So just watch your email, and you can even keep logging into the FAFSA website if you want to check to see when your FAFSA has been processed and to see what your SAI is. Also, colleges and universities may choose your student or may choose you for verification. Verification essentially means that they want you to provide supporting documentation to verify the answer to one of your questions on the FAFSA. You can be chosen for verification for any question. Some students get chosen to verify their birthday or their date of not their birthday, yes, their birthday, but also their state of residency, their citizenship status. But a lot of students are chosen for verification to verify financial information due to the changes in the way in which they're pulling information from the IRS with this new FAFSA. We're hoping that's going to decrease the number of folks who are chosen for verification. But there's still no guarantee. Before the pandemic, there were some schools who chose all of their students for verification. So every student had to verify something on their FAFSA. But it's important to know that if you find out that you're chosen for verification, please provide the school the information they need. When they let you know, they're going to tell you which question they want you to verify and a list of supporting documents that will satisfy their requirement. Choose one thing off the list and provide it to them so that they can continue to make decisions about your financial aid offer for that school. Lastly, if a student receives loans, whether it be federal or private loans, they have to complete online loan interest counseling, and they must sign a master promissory note. Interest counseling essentially is an online kind of module to help them to understand their rights and responsibilities as a student loan borrower. Um, but the master promissory note, though, is the contract that you sign with the student loan servicer, where you make it clear that you're borrowing this money with the expectation that you will repay it back. Um, the master promissory note also shows you the different repayment options and how much you're going to end up paying when it's all said and done, depending on which repayment program you enroll in. It also asks students to submit contact information for 3 people so that they can access you if they can't get in touch with you when you go into repayment later on. So I'll wrap up this talk by encouraging families to have very frank conversations about paying for college. We know talking about money is very uncomfortable. We never want to do it, but it's really important. And I encourage folks to have the same types of conversations that my family had with me. My dad sat me down in August before my senior year. And, he told me that it was great that I wanted to go to college and that he was really proud of me for having those plans, but that it was my responsibility to pay for it. And it was my responsibility to figure it out. He offered to provide any documentation or paperwork that I needed to complete any financial aid applications, but I would have to think about how I was going to pay for this myself. And when the conversation happened, it was kind of deflating. I was so discouraged because it felt like my family was saying, we don't support you. But that wasn't it. It really was about them having to be realistic about what their demands are, their financial demands are, and financial obligations. And as an adult or becoming an adult at that time, just making it clear that these are your goals, so you have to figure out how to support them. So I encourage families to take a book from my dad's playbook. Have that tough conversation with your kid. Yes, it's uncomfortable, but it's necessary. That conversation came in August of my senior year, giving me enough time to change my college list. I had to change my list to only apply to schools that I could afford to attend, schools that I knew I would qualify for enough merit-based scholarship to cover my gap. Or that I knew that the sum of the sub and unsubsidized loan, the $5,500, would be enough to cover my gap, because I really didn't want to borrow loans for undergrad if I didn't have to. I'm grateful that I was awarded enough financial aid to cover all of my cost of living or cost of attendance expenses at the University of Virginia, but I had no idea that that would be my situation at the top of senior year. Much like students don't know what their situation will be. So I think it's important to have very transparent and frank conversations as early as possible so that they can make informed decisions about what's next. So things that families should discuss: earnings and savings. Families, are you thinking about how you're earning and saving money to contribute to college costs? Families, are you willing to contribute money from your earnings or your savings? Those are questions you have to answer, excuse me. Also, many students pay for college by borrowing, by using loans. But those are conversations that the family have to have. Students, if you're considering borrowing, you have to think about what the full education program you're going to need for your career. And if you start borrowing for undergraduate study, you may need to borrow as well for graduate school. The challenge with that is that you don't want to keep compounding loans and borrowing, compounding debt over time. Instead, you can make wiser decisions to go to a more affordable undergraduate school. But these are questions that students have to answer. Families, you have to consider what your financial demands are. There are families that say, you know what, we can't borrow anything. And I think that's fine to say, as long as the student knows that the family is not able to borrow, is not going to borrow to help them offset college costs. Some families say, we're willing to borrow $5,000 a year to help them. Cool, just make sure the kid knows. There are some families that say, we're willing to borrow as much as my kid needs to pay for school. Great, just make sure the student knows. I really encourage transparency around family finances as it relates to preparing for college, so students are aware and they're not blindsided in April when it's time to sit down and make decisions about where they want to go. Too often we're drying tears in April because families don't want to have conversations earlier. So please have those frank conversations. Also, think about things like transportation costs and the cost of health insurance, housing, food, books and supplies when you're determining the costs associated with going to college. Don't just look at tuition and fees, because there are other things that are associated with your college attendance that may not be super obvious at the beginning. Also, as a student, you have a cell phone bill, you have streaming bills, you have different entertainment expenses, or even in some cases, an entertainment budget line like I did. But those are things you have to prepare for and you have to plan for. So families, have conversations around it, have conversations around budgeting and earning and saving, so that everyone is on the same page around expectations in terms of paying for college. Additional resources when you need it. There are many places that you can go for help if you have more questions about paying for college or you like assistance in completing any of the applications that I discussed. Sure, you can reach out to your high school's guidance counselors and your college and career counselors for help. They're there to help you and support you. You can also reach out to us at the College Place. We support every public high school in this state. And we'd be more than happy to help you complete your FAFSA or to provide support for you or your school around financial aid application completion. Also, federal student aid is an invaluable resource. I know sometimes people don't think to reach out to them because they think of it as the government, but they have a great live chat function that I take advantage of all the time if I encounter questions that I don't really know the answer to. And I know financial aid code pretty well, but there may be questions that I don't know the answer to. And so I go to the FSA live chat and type in my questions and they respond immediately. If you have particular issues that are very sensitive to your case, your particular FAFSA, your FSA ID, they even have the capacity for you to log in a secure login space, and then they're able to pull your information up in a way that's secure. So I think it's a great resource to take advantage of if you need it. Also, the College Board has resources through their Big Future platform that can help you better understand the resources in terms of paying for college. But I thank you so much for joining this talk. I know paying for college is such a big topic to discuss because there's so many things that fall under that purview. But I hope this talk gave you insight into the ins and outs of paying for college. They help you to better understand college costs and what's actually in the cost of attendance, where you have agency to control your college costs. I hope you understood the value of the net price calculator and how it really gives you insight into how much you may be required to pay a school after all gift aid has been applied. I hope you understand the differences between the different types of financial aid programs and the applications that you'd have to complete to have access to those buckets of money. And then also, I hope I've empowered you to have conversations around paying for college with your families. The earlier, the better. But if you have more questions after this talk, please, I encourage you to reach out via email or phone. I'm here to support in any way we can. And any service and support from the College Place is completely free. Believe it or not, we are free. So we're here to help anyone who's interested in receiving the support and pursuing their post-secondary dreams. Thanks so much for your time. Again, I pray this was helpful for you and those that you serve. And again, reach out to us if we can be of any support to you. Thanks again and have a great rest of your day.